Oh, it says Mike's muted.
I got it.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for bearing with us as we work through technical difficulties. We are ready to begin. For the record, it's June 23rd, and the time is 9:11. I'll begin the roll call. So, Council, when I call your name, please say here or present. Mayor Maxton.
Here.
Councilmember Stroop.
Here.
Roden.
Here.
Bliss.
Here.
Kerner is not present. Parker.
Here.
And Menchow.
Present.
With 6 members of council present, a quorum is declared.
Thank you, Christina. And would everybody please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of
the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And thank you all. And thank everybody for coming today. And as I mentioned earlier, we are live broadcasting today's meeting. And so if you do get an opportunity to speak as part of the meeting, I ask that you use the mic that's up here at the podium. That allows those individuals that are watching by live broadcast to hear the comments that are being made. If you don't speak over the microphone, they can't understand or they can't hear. If you do get an opportunity to speak, I ask that as part of that you state your name, and if you're from an agency, state what agency you're from, or if you're a resident, please state your name, and if you're a Fair Oaks Ranch resident or not. You do not have to state your address. Okay, moving on to citizens to be heard. We had 2 individuals that signed up to speak as part of citizens to be heard. First is Mr. Calderola. If you're ready, sir.
I'm ready. I'm Vince Calderola, and I live in the North 40. And several of us residents, friends, landowners there have been concerned with budget issues, and we want to explain some budget issues that we think are good recommendations. First of all is we would like you to put a 36-month moratorium on not hiring a city manager. That city manager over 30 gets almost $300,000 a year in benefits. If you look at it, his salary was over about $220,000. He gets a car allowance, he gets a 401k and health care. The other is go ahead and eliminate the 2 assistant managers. We know 1 assistant manager gets $178,000, $7,200 car allowance, health care, and a 401k, which is almost $250,000. The third one probably gets the same amount of money. The third one, who you recognize for 25 years, we as a business would have given her a pink slip and said, go, what have you done for 25 years, 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, or 5 years, and let a company in the city of Fair Oaks run at a deficit, and that's the wastewater management thing. If she's a city manager, she had a responsibility to come to you and tell you this, but you gave her a pin for excellence on this. We don't think that's right in any business. When you take those 3 salaries, that's $800,000 a year almost in savings. The other thing in savings is you've mental masturbated about the 3351 bridge for years. All of a sudden, Mayor Maxton and y'all come up with an epiphany that the bridge is going to solidify the problems of Silver Spur, Low Water Crossing, and Rolling Acres. We don't need it. And you spent tens of thousands of dollars on engineers, consultants to rebuild them, and what did you come up with? Guess what? We want to put some special lights on Rolling Acres at a tune of $172,000. Get rid of that. That's $172,000. You have a police force that can go out there, close the gates, put it there, and protect us. Have you asked any of us how many times that has flooded in the past 7 years? 1. At Silver Spur, it rose 4 feet, because I live right there. On Rolling Acres, where my other property is, it only got it to a foot. Landowners there said, Doc, this has not flooded. Maybe 6 inches, 8 inches. $72,000 in savings. The next thing that's a money pit is the Civic Center. Maples and Manzanita sold you down the creek. You want a civic center? You spent millions of dollars already. And what did you do? You got rid of where you held your meetings, so then you're forced to do something and come here. I just built a 40 by 80 metal building, insulated it, electrical, cement floor for under $100,000. You can do the same thing and add a 5-ton air conditioner, a 1-family bathroom, and have a civic center, and the police force can come in there and exercise. You clean the cement, you get it done. You could $2.5 million budget. The next is the wastewater management. Running a deficit of $500,000 to $750,000, yet the city is not here to tax people or make money off us landowners. You've been making $1.5 million to $2 million on selling water. For you to subsidize that company, that's failing and has been failing. Now, the requirement would be you go ahead. There's only 2,250 households that need wastewater, because there's only 3,750 in the city. 60% need wastewater. That's 2,250. You divide it by your deficit, you increase their bill by $40 a month. Then you tax them, or not tax them, surcharge them a fee of $100 a month for 3 years. $100 a month for 3 years will give you almost $7 million, well, no, I'll get it to you. We'll give you $8 million in 3 years of charging them $1,200 a year. You can build a whole new plant. Then you get rid of that fee on them, and they'll be happy. Don't put it on us, who do have to buy water from you, that you're subsidizing someone. There are people who don't pay for water at all or sewage, and you're charging them with taxes, and us who have to buy water from you. Drop the water rate 50%. You're making $1.5 to $1.7 million off of water. The city is not in the business to gouge citizens for water. Drop the rate 50%. Yes, you can use the excess money. Did you know the average salary for a $4,000, $10,000 city for assistant managers is between $80,000 and $120,000 for a manager? Did you know the average salary for an assistant manager is between $40,000 and $80,000? Alamo Heights, which has the most high-priced real estate in the city, pays $178,000 for the manager. Chavano Park, which is 5,000 people, pays their city manager $80,000. The Manzanitas Maple scheme has got to stop. You have to look at reality. Fair Oaks Ranch is like a 20-ounce cup. We're 75% filled. There's only so much land and so many houses built. If you do the math, you'll come up with it. We have 3,750 homes in this area, 9,960 people. It's not going to go up. You're going to have road maintenances, you're going to have water line maintenances, and you already got problems with your wastewater. You need to plan ahead, and you need to take the hard decisions and not continue to kick down the road. What have you done the last 5 years? All I've heard is 3351, zoning issues, flooding issues, the civic center issues. You haven't done anything constructive. And here, where are we today? We're at the same problem right now. Make the hard decisions and cut expenses. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And second up, Mr. Horwath.
My name is David Horwath. I'm a city resident. I live on Turf Paradise Lane, and I'm going to go in a slightly different direction from what you just heard. I'm going to talk about the meeting that you had on June 15th, and some of the things that came up that struck me both personally and professionally. As a background, several things that you got to consider as a background. In the 2017 to 2018 timeframe, when the city charter was being prepared, the decision was that city council would control finances, and policy. And I believe that you've done a fairly good job on both of them. On a personal basis, my background is as an engineer in a chemical plant. I have spent a lot of time as a project manager or being on project teams. I worked on project teams as a very young engineer. Then I spent a lot of time making presentations to higher management. And after that, I was the engineering head for what was the largest chemical plant in Chevron Chemicals. And I ended up having to redevelop the entire project system. Anyhow, we set up a very strict rules. In fact, they were so strict that my nickname at that time was the Grim Reaper. Because if you didn't follow the rules, you weren't going to be able to get money. My last job as project manager, I was in charge of the utility section of a plant being built in Saudi Arabia. My area had $3 billion worth of expenses that we were doing. Anyhow, that's my background. The meeting that we had on the 15th, which I attended, one of the discussions was concerning the standard personnel agreement for the Civic Center. Well, that discussion started at about 6:45 p.m. and it lasted 20 to 30 minutes. City Council had a lot of questions. I'll have to admit that I thought Clayton did a fairly good job on this contract. This is a good contract. However, there were a lot of questions, a lot of asking, where are various different parts of this money going? What's it going to be for? When I looked at what was presented at that time, it appeared to be to me, it was a classical staged gatekeeper approach to project management, which I've used in the past at all sorts of different ways. But in this particular case, there were a lot of questions from City Council on the specifics of where the costs were going. Be that as it may, it took you 20 to 30 minutes of your time to be able to come up with some questions and some answers. Now, I looked at that, and my first thought was, geez, I don't want to be project manager for this job. There were a lot of questions in the background, a lot of questions about what we have done so far, and I'm not qualified to answer any of them. In fact, I wasn't even qualified to ask questions on that because I had not read the contract. I read it over the past couple days, and well, the contract itself seems fairly good. Now, the other thing that really surprised me, and I want to point out, is that at the end of the discussion, when Grant got up, he recommended getting a project manager for the projects coming up. Well, if you had a project manager or somebody basically in charge of projects overall, you would not have had to ask those questions, and that whole discussion would have been much faster, much more succinct, and you'd have gotten all your answers in a hurry. So the conclusion that I'm coming to is that you're coming up with a project for the wastewater treatment that also appears to be another one of these staged gatekeeper approaches. And you have a lot of projects going on. In fact, one of my favorites is sitting over here, and he's leaving. Anyhow, what I'm saying is that I recommend that when you start looking at personnel for the next year, go along with Grant's idea of having a project manager because it will save you time and probably end up saving money. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And these were the only two individuals that signed up to speak as part of Citizens to be Heard. Is there anybody that did not get an opportunity to sign up that would like to speak? All right. We'll move on to the purpose for today's meeting, which is a special called city council meeting, really to review our strategic action plan. And in the budgeting process, strategic action plan is important because it outlines the priorities of what we're going to look at. Really, what we're getting to is for the next 5 years. And as a presentation we did a couple months ago, and an annual look at how we build towards budget, we would actually have gone through the strategic action plan probably, I don't know, March, April timeframe, to outline the priorities of what we want to look at really for the upcoming year, so we can carry that forward into the budget cycle. And so why is developing a strategic action plan important? And so as we carried that forward into the budgeting process, and from my point in looking at this, there's a million things that are out there that we can focus our energy on. And really what the strategic action plan provides us is it narrows the scope. And so as we're heading into the year and we look at the budget, we're really prioritizing and focusing on what it is that we want to concentrate our efforts on. And when we say efforts, it's all of our resources, it's man hours, it's budget, it's everything that's required to accomplish those goals that we lay out. And so without deliberating or going into this more extensively, the purpose and the understanding and why a strategic action plan is so important is because it outlines and provides that focus that we need going into the next year so that we use our resources wisely. And so that's why it's important that we really, we set up a special council meeting today to review this, and we do need input to ensure that we're developing the right priorities, not just for this year, but as it leads into the next 5 years. But what we do need is a good look at what we do for the next year so we can carry it forward to the budgeting cycle. Did I mess anything up?
Absolutely not. No, that's perfect. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Scott Husengate, Interim City Manager. And I guess a couple of housekeeping items first as we get into this for your reference. As we go through the actual strategic action plan, we'll primarily be going off of what's in your packet, the presentation and the grid there. This item that I emailed to you earlier this week and handed out today is the current or maybe old plan that we've had for the last year. So primarily for your reference, if you just want to compare and contrast what's changed from the last year, what's been completed, you can use this document. But primarily we'll be going off of the draft new version for today, and I just wanted to point out the difference between those two. Also, obviously, hopefully this is of course intended to be an open discussion. We'll see where the time takes us, but as we go through, I'm certainly open to periodic breaks, hourly or give or take, both for whatever obvious physical needs we have, but also for attention spans. It can be tough to slog through something, 2-3 hours without a break. So keep that in mind as we go through it too. If there's a natural stopping point, I can suggest, or Mayor, if you want to do
Okay.
that, that's okay too. So with that, I'll start and try and get through the presentation portion as quickly as I can. But of course, we are here to talk about the 5-year strategic action plan. I kind of looking at this as a reboot in a sense, and making this more of a not just annual, but an ongoing cycle of review and updating, so that it's more than just a static plan or a theoretical exercise. Today, we'll quickly go through the meeting objectives. I'll quickly take you through our planning cycle and how the strategic plan fits in. I know you've seen that before. And of course, we mainly want to focus today on our 5 strategic plan pillars and the priorities underneath them that ideally define the pillars and what that means to us. So the objectives. So I used this terminology last year as well. It's review, update, and reinforce. Again, we want to make this process repeatable and integrated into our business that we do on a daily basis. Again, so it's not just a one-year exercise. Most of the things we do should somehow tie back to the plan, whether it be through our projects, through the KPIs, which we'll touch on a little bit today, through our proposed projects. So right now, again, some of this discussion may be a little bit esoteric or high level as we refresh it, but ultimately I hope it's a good use of your time as we plan out the next 5 years, because we want to take what we do today, incorporate the changes, and bring this back to you, at least on a quarterly basis, if not monthly, whether we do that by pillar or by project, but embed this into our internal process and the council process as well, so it is refreshed and updated regularly. Usually, strategic plan starts with the vision statement. Of course, we've had an adopted vision statement for many years. Of course, the textbook definition of a vision statement is, I better read this one, to look forward, create a mental image of the ideal state that the organization wishes to achieve. It should be inspirational, aspirational, and should challenge employees and stakeholders. Our vision statement is to offer the ideal place to call home in the Hill Country, guided by strong community values and responsible growth that provides residents of all ages a place to relax and connect. Without objection, I don't have any plans to change this one, but I'm open up if there is any discussion, but just wanted to remind everybody this is usually the very tippy top of the strategic plan before we get into pillars and that type of thing. So that's our vision statement. It is on the website, and we're incorporating that into our branded materials as well. The city also has a mission statement which describes who we are and what we do now. Ideally, it should describe who it benefits as well. So our vision statement is to deliver exceptional public services, preserve the natural beauty of our city, protect and promote quality of life, and foster community engagement. And most will recall this came out of the branding committee from 2 or 3 years ago, probably, maybe a little more than that. Again, I think this still very much accurately reflects what we do on a daily basis, and that is the intent of the mission statement. So these are the two guiding principles or statements that should guide, again, obviously our strategic plan and everything that trickles down or coalesces from said plan.
As we're kicking off the strategic action plan, and we're looking at the vision statement and our mission statement, my opinion, it covers those areas that I believe are the priorities of what we need for the future of Fair Oaks Ranch and what we do today. As a council, it's important that we have, because this is really the starting point that outlines where our priorities are. Any concerns or, and really as a council, for us, it's probably the first time we've gone through this at this detail, so. All right.
Perfect.
They're pretty effective.
All we need is the affirmation. And again, typically these top several levels should not change very often if we're doing this right, so that's good. We'll start to move into the plan itself. As you've all seen through several years now, the adopted strategic plan or approved strategic plan has, I guess we haven't formally adopted, it has five pillars. Again, pillars are overarching policy goals that should guide and organize everything that we do with respect to with planning, budgeting, and performance operations in order of how they appear in the plan, not necessarily any priority order, but the 5 pillars are, as proposed, financial resilience and restraint. That's a new title that we'll talk about here in just a second. Second is responsible growth management, reliable and sustainable infrastructure, public health, safety, and justice, which is also a proposed new pillar change, and operational excellence. The structure of the plan, we talked about the vision and mission already. The structure of our plan functions through what we've been calling the 4 Ps: pillars, priorities, projects, and performance measures. We like our alliteration. Again, pillars are, like we said, intended to be long-standing. They rarely change, as these are the ultimate objectives as defined by the council. And they've been in place since the very first version of this plan, circa, 2017, 18, somewhere in there. Priorities, and this is mainly what we'll talk about today, are the medium-term strategies typically intended to be 2 to 5 years. They should define the progress in each of the pillars. They should define what each pillar means. And the intent is to accomplish or substantially accomplish those priorities within the lifespan of the plan, which in our case is 5 years. Pillars and priorities together, we say, form the strategic plan. That's the level that's typically defined by the city council, and that's where we want to focus most of our efforts. Meanwhile, the staff recommends and supports what we call the tactical plan, which is composed of projects and performance measures. Projects are short-term tactics and actions, as it says. It should usually take no more than 2 to 3 years to complete a project. And a project should measure how the priorities are reported. So that's the inverse pyramid structure we have here. This is where we typically start to see the strategic plan, how it influences the budget primarily through projects. And finally, we'll touch on KPIs today, or performance measures. That's where we need to update and enhance this plan over time. But that's how we track ongoing success and implementation of the plan. We have internal performance measures. We'll talk a little bit more about this. We haven't really formally reported them on a city council base. So part of our discussion, I hope, will be what are some measures that the council would like to see to track progress in our high-level pillars. What does public safety mean, and how should we be tracking progress in that regard? So that's one of the open discussion items for today. Finally, we've talked about the circle of life before, I know. This is the policy process, and right now even though we've done our long-term financial plan, which is kind of the middle of our cycle, we're also looking at the pillars and priorities, which, as the mayor mentioned, typically is closer to the beginning of the process. Ideally, we probably would have done that in the April timeframe, like the mayor mentioned, but we've only had one budget workshop so far, so I think there's still plenty of time to catch up. But moving forward, by the time we get to the annual budget process itself, we should have an updated strategic plan, also a long-term financial plan that is influenced by the strategic plan. So when we get to the budget, or what I call the one-year snapshot of the 5-year plan, we should have these items in place. Ideally, there won't be a lot of surprises in the annual budget or draft or proposed budget, because we will have discussed the vast majority of at least the high-level items or projects as part of this strategic planning and long-term financial planning process. So I think we have most of the building blocks in place. This is just part of the process to get us on a routinized cycle, so that as we go through this in the future, we have these policy discussions in advance of the budget and the individual council meetings, of course, that we hold throughout the year. As we go through each of our pillars and priorities, these are the questions that I will probably repeat several times as we look at the priorities under each pillar. Again, the key is to ensure that this is a council plan first, guiding the policy. It won't be perfect right away. In my experience in other local governments, it typically takes 3 or 4 iterations to really get good at this. So if there's some items that are a little undefined or nebulous, that's okay. I think that's a natural part of the process. But the questions we will be asking are on the screen. But we'll ask, do the priorities, the 5 to 7 priorities in each pillar, do they properly present and define the pillar as it means to you? As you're going through the priorities in each pillar, one question you may want to ask yourself is, does this make sense if I don't look at the projects, right? I mean, the projects are important, obviously, but if I look at the priorities, does it make sense to me? Does it accurately define what we're trying to accomplish with the pillar, the goal? If not, it might be good for a change. It can be tempting to skip over the priority level and drill down just to the projects. Sometimes I think that can result in suboptimal outcomes if we're planning projects without first thinking about the priority and why we're doing the projects, what we're trying to accomplish, right? So I think that structure is important. So these are the types of questions we'll ask. We don't have to necessarily add priorities or projects. It's okay to modify or even subtract what gets budgeted gets done, or words to that effect. So we want to keep that in mind so we're not over-scoping ourselves. But at this level of the plan, we're getting to priorities, and certainly in the projects, we're getting past the aspirational to the more specific. So this is why we ask some of these questions as we go through the pillars. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to, did you have a question?
Yeah. One.
Go ahead.
So looking back, and maybe we'll talk about this in a sec, so you may just say we'll talk about that later. You said that we renamed a few of the pillars. So my question is, what's the reasoning behind the change in the name of, specifically, it's 2 pillars, it looks like to me,
Yes.
possibly. Did staff not feel it was clear before? Are we adding more things to those pillars? I mean, I see it's restraint and justice, which those are a little bit of, in my opinion, strange terms to add. But
Sure.
I'm just curious what I guess the reasoning behind all of it was and why we chose those specific words, because,
We can address that now.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll go through it again. But yeah, those 2 specifically, that was our, or really my attempt to incorporate the feedback from last year's meeting. When we talked about the old terminology, there was at least a few comments made about the use of, or what was meant by financial integrity, which was or is, I guess you could say, the current goal title. And there was discussion around being fiscally conservative. Restraint came up several times. I went with restraint. I'm certainly not married to it, if you will. We can. It doesn't have to be that, but the idea was to incorporate that a more conservative, or I'm trying to think of a synonym for restrained.
I would say we want to be
Outlook.
fiscally responsible. I want to get what's done, what needs to be done. Obviously, I'm up here and I'm a fiscal conservative. We know that, but I also don't want to restrain. I don't know. I think that's a strong word. It's
Sure.
specifically for our pillars. That's just me. Again, I don't know what to use. I don't have a recommendation for that. And what was your thought process behind adding justice?
That was primarily the incorporation of the municipal court projects and priorities into that pillar. And that was a specific comment that came out last year that we thought, and I agree, that those municipal court items more belonged in the public safety pillar. So we moved that function up, and I just added the term justice at the end.
And I thank you for that, because that wasn't where my brain went. My brain went with social justice.
Okay,
And so
that was not the intent, but
yeah, and so I guess that's what I'm drilling down to, is we need to be very clear. And
Sure.
I mean, adding judiciary, different words, but that to me, I would have never gone to the court with justice, personally.
fair.
I'm gonna say, I agree.
Sorry, technical difficulties yet again. I've got to agree with Chesley's points. I'm all about fiscal restraint, but there are times that you have to spend money to keep roads and services moving. And I think the pillar should be responsibility versus trying to delineate and tie hands of future councils and staff insofar as, oh no, we're going to be too afraid to spend money when we need to spend money in order to keep things rolling. And I'm not saying that I'm jumping on the bandwagon where we need to spend money, but I just think that if we're talking about the pillars of the way that we're going to be doing things, that we really need to look at the wording, for the future. Change is good, but sometimes not changing is good also, kind of thing. And I understand what the idea is, insofar as trying to be more specific. And I also agree, I was right there on the social justice issues, and I think that when we talk about law enforcement and keeping the city safe, I think we can do that without having to, either we need to be more specific and talk about the court system, or just kind of leave it where it was.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I agree with the financial responsibility. And as Scott was talking, I was going down the priorities that we've listed. And restraint to me kind of gives a connotation that we're holding back, or, our focus is to find ways to limit. Where really, if you look at the priorities that are listed, I think what we're saying is that we're responsible, that we're making decisions in a responsible manner that are in line with our strategic action plan, our vision, our mission statement, which really is focused at looking at the long-term goals of the city and where we want to get to.
Excellent.
I was going to make a comment. So really what Scott has laid out and done very well is kind of the basics of what a strategic action plan is. And before we go any further, and it was great comments, does everybody understand the premise of what it is that we're doing with the strategic action plan? And if you don't, I mean, that's okay. Now would be the time to ask the questions so that we make sure we have a good foundation that we're operating from as we go forward. And if you have questions, please, that's what the workshop's for. Okay?
Yeah. And please feel free to interrupt, ask questions. I'll just for structure, I'll go through pillars in each priority, but stop me at any time. It's just a list with notes I have, but it's intended to be fluid, Q&A back and forth, so that's very much encouraged. So with that, we'll drill right into the first pillar. We talked about of course, my first note was we changed the title. We talked about that some already, good suggestion. So what I'm hearing is, I think I also added the word resilience, but I do like responsibility. So we can do responsibility and resilience, just responsibility, if there's any preference there. But I very much like the term responsibility. It's a relatively popular use of other governmental goals with regard to finance. Responsibility is usually at or near the top, so I think that makes perfect sense, and we can make that change. And I think that's a great suggestion. All right, so I got through most of that. So we did, in this pillar, we added or revised some of the projects and the timing of the pillar, but this one, if you go through past iterations, we've made, I think, a lot of success on already, so you'll see more tweaks to timing or one new significant prior as we go through it. But again, for the sake of structure, I'll just start with 1.1, which is to develop and maintain a budget process that links with the strategic action plan. So as we go through this, this is part of that priority, and one of the key items I think that's yet to be done under this priority, and why it's not finished, in my opinion, is that we need to not only develop that cycle that we talked about, but also link KPIs with the strategic plan, not just in this pillar, but throughout. So I think it's in progress. Obviously we have a strategic plan. We're getting closer linking to the budget cycle, but there's still work to be done in that area. So we're trying, the key item under this one, I'm glad it's 1.1 because it really influences everything else in the plan, is to make this plan more actionable. So very quickly, if you're thinking about your pillar of financial resilience, responsibility, does develop and maintain a budget process that links to the strategic action plan? Does that make sense as a definition? I think it does, but. And without objection, I'll just keep going. and like stop me anytime. 1.2 is to develop a 5-year forecast. We have a plan, and we presented that a couple of times this year. There's certainly room for improvement, so I don't regard this one as completed yet either. Some of the specific items that are listed as projects within this priority is to add staffing plans, formally update and integrate the CIP into the 5-year forecast, which we have transfer amounts for now, but we can get that more refined. And ultimately to add the utility fund, which we have as a separate rate study plan now into the 5-year forecast. So again, I think a lot of work certainly has been done in this area, but still enhancements to be made as we go through further iterations. We want to tie that more closely to the budget. So I see this as one that's very much in progress, but not yet completed.
I like the 5-year forecast. It's something that we've been working towards probably for the last couple years. And we did get a good framework put together that we could go through. And some of the challenges for me as we make decisions, as we go through the budgeting process, there are decisions that we make today that we add to the budget that have a carryover into future years' budgets. And so I think it's important to understand that those decisions that we're making today and the impact that they're going to have on budgets 2 to 5 years out. And that's what this financial plan will provide us as we go into the future. And some of that is, as we add, if we add FTEs or individuals to staffing, we can identify that we've made that budget decision this year, but that individual stays on the rolls for the next 5 years is our financial model. So that becomes a cost that we're assuming for that time period. And it also goes with equipment. And so as we take on equipment, additional equipment, it may save us, but looking at the maintenance and the requirements to operate it need to be carried forward into years 2 through 5 so that we're capturing that as part of our operational expenses, operations and maintenance into the future years. That makes sense to everybody?
Yeah. No, I think that's an excellent point. And if I can nerd out on some of our GFOA principles for a second, one of the criteria that dings almost every budget review that I do, and you go through the criteria to get the award, which we've gotten for the last 5 years, 4 or 5 years, is impact of the capital improvements plan on the operations budget. That's a specific criteria in the awards program, and very few cities or budgets do a really good job of presenting that. And I think there's work for us to be done as well. But I just wanted to highlight that it's not just here, not just a concept we're looking at. That's a universally not mandated but explored topic. So very key.
Hey, Scott, on the 5-year forecast, do you update that with each budget modification? Is there a materiality change where you change the forecast, or do you do it annually, or what's the plan?
We've done it, well, technically this was our first run at it, but
Okay.
the intent is to do it at least annually. And as our cycle go, we would present that in the March, April timeframe. Or probably May, but before the budget, yes. And we talked about during those sessions as well. The model can also be done anytime based on specific circumstances. So we have the intent to have kind of an annual updated 5-year forecast, but if we need to model specific changes, if there's some type of economic shock, if there's a new program we want to roll out, or some type of whatever reason needed cutbacks, the intent is that to be a rolling plan so that we can update on the fly as well.
Okay.
But again, yeah, to your question, the point is to use that as the base for the budget. So we see it very much impacts the current year that we're developing, of course, but like the mayor said, we can model that over at least a 5-year time frame too, to see the changes that and how that influences the long term.
Thank you.
Priority 1.3 is develop a risk inventory and mitigation strategies. We've implemented, I think, virtually all of the items from the risk management report that the the city procured 3 or 4 years ago, probably now, and we've fully developed our matrix, and we've implemented all the recommendations. One of the last steps that we haven't conducted, due primarily just to turnover administrative changes, is to actually conduct an audit to ensure that we are validating that we have implemented. We believe we have. This one is key, not only to, I think, complete this priority, but also will come up as a budget package for you to consider in the upcoming budget, as well as whether we want to budget for an external audit to validate our internal controls processes.
So if, I was going to be Roy and actually recommend that, so it's funny that you brought that up. But if they see risks or identify more risks, I'm assuming that this will stay on and not be completed.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. And of course, that's an ongoing process as well. We don't take to any risk manager, we don't say, okay, done now. We don't have to do that anymore, right? But as far as the actual initiative that the city took a number of years ago to develop these steps, to
I'm
validate.
assuming we'll get on like some sort of recurring schedule to have internal audits done in different areas.
Yeah, and some places do different sections annually. I think you want to do it at minimum every 5 years, holistically. Let's see, 1.4, develop sustainable financing strategies aligned with service delivery expectations. Here, the remaining items, this primarily relates to how we develop our fee schedules and our fee schedules, our impact fees, CIP funding, that type of thing. It's closely linked to Pillar 3, which has a bond development program embedded within that pillar. Over the next several months, we do plan to review our impact fees, but also bring to the City Council in, I think, about either 4 or 6 weeks, 2 or 3 meetings from now, an item that will cover many of our remaining or updating our entire fee schedules. That will include not just utilities, but tree mitigation, all of our development fees, plan review, building permits, et cetera. So that's one of the remaining items under this one. But that review hasn't been done in I don't know how many years. We're pretty far behind on a lot of, particularly on the development side. So you'll see that very soon. But the idea here is to ensure that where services should pay for themselves, they do. And perhaps should even just say that, but that's the pillar as presented thus far. So does that make sense? That's the real key that I'll probably be asking a lot. Does this make sense, right? Okay. 1.5, ensure continuity and excellence in financial reporting reliability. We have many good financial policies in place. That's a process that the city with the council undertook, for several years, going back to, I want to say 2016, plus or minus. We've now operated with them for a few years, so we have an updated reserve policy, investment or fund balance policy, investment policy. We're finishing up our procurement policy with the changes that council adopted in December. So we have good policies in place, but those should be reviewed at least annually as well to determine whether any updates should be made. So the only change here is to update proposed change is to update the cycle so that this stays on our radar, that we are updating those accordingly. Fund balance, do we still think 50% is appropriate? And maybe we do, but it's important to at least review that on a policy level and with the council. Implement procurement function 1.6. We're finalizing, as I just mentioned, the latest internal procurement manual draft that will go out within the next couple of weeks. That will incorporate the surplus policy that the council adopted in late December, plus some other changes administratively. So this one started several years ago, this priority, with actually hiring a procurement manager and making the changes. So this one is largely completed, and I think with the revisions to the procurement manual, my intent is this one could perhaps come off the list in certainly by the time we get to this next year. So that's why I've tentatively put it as completed. Mr. Parker, looks like you have a question.
Will that come to us for review before it's implemented, or?
It can.
I think I'd just like to see a copy.
Sure, yeah, it's not a problem. We can
Even a
see it.
draft is good.
Right. So back to our financial policies. We do have financial policies that state as far both in our charter and in our adopted policies as far as what types of items have council review versus what the city manager or staff is administratively delegated to do. So those policies are in place. We have the $50,000 threshold when you have to get quotes, things like that. And what the manual does in a book about that thick is further delineate the processes behind that internally that we follow. Who signs for what, how to get quotes on different, whether it's RFQ, RFP, et cetera. So that's what that's doing.
Just to be clear, I have no interest in getting in the weeds, okay? I mean, that's not my job.
But again, absolutely no issue sharing it whatsoever, yeah.
It's just, where we're spending, how we spend the money is of interest, I
Absolutely.
think, and should be.
No, I think it's good just because, if nothing else, just to highlight the great work that the team has done over the last few years to get it out too.
Absolutely.
In my I guess current role and my interim role, I inherited a pretty good start, right? So we've made a lot of changes and tweaks to it based on recent policy changes, like what I mentioned, items that I've seen. But it's a great document already, and it just needs to be updated so we can incorporate what you've already approved.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
1.7 is the one new priority that I propose under this pillar, which is modernize our ERP system. This would often, some of these items are fluid. You could argue this is a project, but this is potentially such a large project that I place it as a proposed priority. Currently, the city uses Encode 9. It's a Tyler Technologies project. It's basically late 90s, early 2000s era technology that's still being used. It's still being supported, so it's not, at this point, I don't know if there's a scheduled end of life for it, but a lot of communities that have used it have already gone away from it to more modern platform, web-based, cloud-based, with a lot more reporting capabilities than what we have now. Both from the financial perspective, that also runs all of our court administration is also tied to Encode. So all the reporting, all of the data input, everything is run through there. Our utilities is substantially tied to it. We have a separate meter reading system, but that feeds Encode. So everything that we do virtually is tied to this system. So since it is still being supported, this isn't necessarily on fire per se yet, but I have to imagine sometime within the 5-year time horizon, this plan, it wouldn't shock me if there is an announcement along the line. A lot have either went away, use a different system altogether, or at least upgraded to version 10 or beyond. So that's certainly something we need to look at.
I would say thank you for being proactive on that, because the last thing we want is for it not to be supported and then we're up a creek without a paddle. So thank you for being proactive to get us moving forward and at least thinking about it, just for me.
So right now, I think it's safe to say we're trying to get to a steady state, both with our systems and our personnel. But again, this is something we definitely need to have on the forefront going forward.
Scott, I had a quick question. So right now, we're going through the priorities of each of the pillars, and I was kind of tracking the projects. Are we going to come back and go through that, or should we be looking at the projects?
We can do it however you want, of course, but I'd encourage you to look at them now as we go through it, and unless you want to loop back. I'm good either way. Like I said, I'm focusing on the priorities because I want to make sure that they make sense in the abstract, before we focus on the projects. Like I said, do these make sense in and of themselves? But that said, you can ask about any or all of the projects at any time.
Okay.
So where I was going with this is some of the wrap-up questions, talk about and then maybe that's a good opportunity to ask about the project. So as we look at this pillar as a whole and our proposed changes to the title and others, like I said, we've substantially completed a lot of these, but again, the question that I asked at the top is, do these make sense to you as they stand right now? Is there anything high level that we think is missing as it relates to our financial responsibility, our financial operations? And what are, from your perspective, and discuss now or we can come back later too, but what are some good high level benchmarks that we should be using to track financial progress or success in our financial operations? So with that, sir, I can open the floor if you have comments on that, the projects, et cetera.
Hey, Scott, just going back to that ERP system, just at a high level, what does that cover, that system? You said it has to do with rates, and what all does that system provide?
The functionality.
Yeah,
So I'll have to think.
very high
about it.
level, I don't need.
So it's all of our financial operations, everything from payroll, AP.
Okay,
We do our budgeting on a separate system, but it imports in accounts receivable. Our utilities billing is based in that. We export it from there to our biller for the mailing, but it starts there. Like I said, I mentioned all of our municipal court operations go through the system. Any help?
all ledger, all financial ops, okay, thanks.
Well, that was a simple answer.
Yeah, her answer
And a
was
very
good.
large answer at the same time, quite frankly.
Yeah. If you need a 2-word answer from an accountant, call it mission accomplished.
Right.
I think, just looking up at the council, so the original question I had, so looking at the projects, my thoughts is that if you want to go through and do a review of the priorities, make sure we're online, but while we're in this pillar, let's go ahead and look at the projects
Sure.
also, just to make sure that we're online, and then once we complete that, then we move on to the next pillar. Is that?
That's totally fine.
Yeah. That works.
I don't have any prepared notes on the projects, but we noted where the items that are either new or revised in some form or fashion, and can speak in some cases as to why. Hopefully, they're self-explanatory in most cases, why they're at least proposed, the new ones. And in some cases, we tweak the timing as well. So either if we're extending a project, or like in the case of developing financial management policies, I just proposed to essentially develop a new cycle of that process. So I have that essentially update everything over the next 4 years. This is kind of a straw man, if you will, right now. So there's nothing that's sacrosanct from my perspective in this plan, but happy to go over any questions you have.
Good? Okay. So really, as we've done this, so we've identified a pillar, financial responsibility, and with this, we've looked at priorities, and then now projects. And so really what we're identifying as part of this is we're identifying those because I don't want to use the word priority, but those areas where we want to focus our efforts, our resources, our assets in financial responsibility for the next year. And so really, it does limit us, but it puts it all in one group so that we know that we need to get these things done before we focus on other areas. Is that?
Fair? Mm-hmm. And just quickly, and it's not on here, but some of the high-level measures that we already track in this regard, and we want to integrate, but I want to leave it open for discussion as well. But when I'm thinking about this pillar, I'm thinking in terms of obviously our reserve level is at or near the top of a measure we need to track consistently and just report as a part of this process. Time to pay, So, are we meeting our 30-day, or what's our, hopefully no more than 30 days, but ideally substantial less. What's our time to pay within this one? Number of procurement contracts. Those are just a few, about probably a dozen that we track already. So we do have some, but one of the questions I will ask and continue asking is, are there specific things that you would be interested in seeing on a recurring basis that measures or tracks how we're progressing or maintaining our financial operations?
Yeah, and I don't have any specifics on it, but as you were discussing it, what came to mind for me is that if we've identified that these are the focused area projects that we're going to concentrate our efforts on for the next year, then really this is the measure that we can utilize to really review, maybe on a quarterly basis, or maybe semi-annual would be enough, but to really check ourselves to ensure, are we using our assets? Are we doing the right things? Are we accomplishing that we've laid out? And so, maybe it's 2 or 3 times a year we pull it out and we can go through it. And so then it really becomes the PKIs and what we identify, and are those the right measures to look at to say, are we accomplishing what it is that we wanted to get done for the year?
Mm-hmm. No, I think you said this, or at least sparked it for me. In addition to ongoing KPIs, which will include this,
KPIs, sorry.
this should be our checklist if we're doing this right. So we'll have the KPIs in each of the pillars, like I mentioned, for the activity that the staff and the teams are doing at a high level that support the broad goal or pillar. But along the way, these are our projects, and we should be the measure for most of these is completed or not completed, right? But we should be checking them off at least by the year. And then sometimes things happen for a reason that will push a project back, but that's part of our report too. So you envision, if you go through for those who are in project management, this is not new for you, but if you have your green, yellow, red type of scenarios where in a specific project things may change or be delayed for a reason. Yellow, for example, if it's on hold, isn't necessarily bad, but we should be reporting why that's the case, or if there are issues to address, certainly at the policy level. But that's the intent. So, thank you. Ready for Pillar 2?
We'll take a break?
5 minutes.
All right. Can we
Sure.
take a break?
Absolutely.
Is there anything specific, Christina, we need to recess for 5 minutes, or?
Yes, that would be ideal.
Okay. Christina, I have the time now is 10:14, and we'll go in recess, and we'll be back in open session at 10:24. So that gives everybody 10 minutes. All right, I have the time now is 10:24, and we're back in open session.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we pull this back up, we'll roll into Pillar 2, which is responsible growth management. For the most part on Pillar 2 right now, we've updated the timing of the projects, either to reflect the current or to, in some cases, propose a new cycle, like in the case of our building codes. We have a building code, but that should be refreshed every so often as well. So that's where you'll see a lot of the changes. The timing may still need to be tweaked on some, but that will be most of the changes you see within the projects themselves. And again, we've tried to identify revised versus new and that type of thing. Priority 1 is manage the physical development of the city in accordance with the comprehensive plan. Here we're proposing some new items with respect to the future land use map. Coming off last year's strategic plan review, there was discussion, I think there's still discussion about how and whether and how to participate in regional development committees as they relate or could impact Fair Oaks Ranch, and also looking at potential multimodal development, easy for me to say, as part of this item. So we add those based on some discussion at last year's strategic planning meeting. I also propose adding looking at a small commercial element as part of this based on at least a comment last year. Like everything, these are all open to discussion. I think that one issue from a management perspective that's been exposed certainly in recent weeks is the lack of dedicated staff to deal with some development issues as they arise through turnover and sometimes through perhaps some missed training opportunities. We've been caught a little flat-footed a couple times. There was discussion at the last meeting about considering an in-house planner as part of the budget discussion. So we tried to incorporate not that position specifically, but generally a staffing component as part of this priority. Yes, ma'am.
Within this whole growth management, where does the transportation lines on the map that we've been talking about fall? I know we update, I guess we've talked about updating transportation, and I didn't know, I see wastewater, I see UDC, I see drainage, but we definitely want to talk about lines on a map for transportation.
Sure.
I think it would fall under 2.1.2 in the update of the comprehensive plan, because that's where it's listed at.
Yeah, I agree. I think as it stands now, it certainly would be within 2.1. That's for sure. But it brings up a good point. Is the one I didn't. Again, I called out future land use map. I did not specifically call out transportation.
Well, and that's why when I saw this, I
plan.
said, okay, it looks like we're listing everything individually. I'm fine keeping it in the comprehensive plan and just saying that, but if we're listing it, then we should list transportation. I think that's extremely important, personally.
I agree, and I would suggest that as a project. I think within that for transportation, that's a great suggestion. Two point two is implement and update infrastructure master plans. We went through that process and finalized that 2020, 2021. We got them all updated somewhere in there. 18, 19, were they done at that point in time? Okay, but as the process goes, and some of the timing may need to be tweaked. You update your master plans, then you develop your CIP funding behind it. You execute the plan and you repeat. So the idea behind this is essentially to repeat. And if you want more color or questions on the master plan process, I'll probably defer to Grant. But the intent here was to ensure that we're continuing that cycle, not just for the current plans and the 5-year CIP that we've laid out for consideration now, that while we're doing that, we're already planning for the next phase or the next cycle.
In looking at these, and when we talk about the master plans, I think it's important, and it's something that I laid out when we talked about the yearly process, is that we look at these, because – in some of these cases, as we look at our master plan for water, 2020, 2021, we got them all updated somewhere in there. 18, 19, were they done at that point in time? Okay, but as the process goes, and some of the timing may need to be tweaked. You update your master plans, then you develop your CIP funding behind it. You execute the plan and you repeat. So the idea behind this is essentially to ensure that we're continuing that cycle, not just for the current plans and the 5-year CIP that we've laid out for consideration now, that while we're doing that, we're already planning for the next phase or the next cycle.
In
Grant, I mean, you've already accomplished some of the projects that are listed on there and even our wastewater plan. And so it changes the environment. So one, we checked off projects that we probably need to remove from our master plan. And in that, it may have changed the environment, which then may change the priorities that we have as part of the master plan. And so it doesn't have to be a thorough review of detailed hours, but at least a courtesy review to make sure that we're still on track with the focus areas that we need to have. So I think it's worth a yearly review as we go into this budget process.
Right, and I think that was part of the cycle that you and the council discussed in March-ish, whenever that meeting was. So,
That makes sense, Grant, or?
And I'm assuming, going along with that, staff will have on their radar what is required of us by our charter in reviewing these things. I'm assuming. Yes.
oh, yes, yeah, we have
Follow
talked
the
about
charter,
the
definitely.
comprehensive plan requirement that's in the charter. Is it 2 or 3 years?
2 years.
Which I personally think that's an awful lot of review of a 20, 30-year plan, but it is in the charter, so that is on the radar as well.
And does it, this is me not knowing, sorry, but in that review, does it specify the depth of the review? So if we do one serious review, and then it's kind of a quick, we can put it on the meeting, a quick overview, is very different than digging in depth every time, for every 2 years.
I'd have to go back and read the wording, but I believe does it say we have to adopt it every 2 years, or?
It doesn't require that, I believe, but go ahead.
So,
Some of the plans are in our charter for review purposes, and basically it says a review and update every 5 years or 2 years. It doesn't get into the weeds of how much in debt. State law, I believe, like impact fees, says it must be reviewed every 5 years. Doesn't say you go how to do it, but you must do it. Yeah.
good question.
Okay. Let's see, master plans, and then 2.3 is enhanced local mobility and multimodal connectivity. This one, I have a broad question for you, and I guess is this a priority, and if so, I think it needs much development. I think it's safe to say there's been some community interest in multimodal, bike, ped, other forms of transportation. We have incorporated some high-level concepts into our collector design standards. We presented the concepts for that at our transportation town hall, among other venues. But here, really, I'm looking for some guidance from the council on how or if we want to enhance multimodal design and practices as part of our transportation system.
I have a question on that. Is the purpose of that, or maybe that's what this is, you're trying to get to the answer that I'm about to ask, but is the purpose of that to evaluate not only what we can do within our city, but try to work with other cities in order to, okay.
I absolutely think it is, yes.
Because I had a lot of people ask, not a lot of people, but a dozen or so when I campaigned a year and a half, 2 years ago, asked me that very question. So I think it would be great have something like that. It just seems like it's going to be a difficult thing to get done, but I'm all for it.
I think that's a good one to add, though, just to emphasize that regional aspect. I think could be an important add.
When I look at this, I really don't have, I have a hard time wrapping my brain around this. And I understand the idea, because our city is so diverse, it's one thing to have a pseudo cart path that the carts aren't actually supposed to use, according to our transportation plan, right? And then when you get to where my house is in the back 40, or our houses are, you can barely ride a bike down Meadow Creek Trail without fear of getting run over, type of thing. So are we saying that in our future designs of our roads, this is what we're going to do, or is this going to be something that proactively as a council, we want to throw money at? And that's, I would like a little bit of input from you guys as well. Because we've said this before, and it's come up from citizens to be heard, just where we're willing to take this or where we would like to see it happen. Because if we want to work with this, and then, from Grant's perspective, when we start doing road design or reworking of whatever roads we're going to be doing, then that needs to be incorporated. That's what I'm seeing. If I'm missing the point, please tell me. I'm not quite sure what we mean by this. I mean, it's a lot of words and it's a lot of ideas, concept that we talk about linking the different parks that we don't even own, right? Because they're FORHA properties. What are we looking at doing? So let me just stop talking and give me kind of an idea.
So I would like, as a council member, to have more details, data to drive something like this. I know we have the select 3 or 4 people that come in here and yak our ears off. I have probably 10 or 15 that don't want change, so I would like to know as a community, what does the community want? Because honestly, I don't have a clue. I don't know, because there's loud people on both sides, but what does the actual bulk of the community want? So before I would move forward, and I'm not saying I'm for or against something like this, but before I would move forward, just to redirect Grant in all his planning stages of roads. I mean, we're going to have Ammon Road coming up and all of these, and right now, Ammon Road, you can't even drive a golf cart because of the speed limit, and so it's completely different from the other, and then does that put a liability on us with the way that road is, to be honest? And so before I could even think about being, I would need more details and data as to what does the community really want, and does the community realize if we start to do this, we move forward with something like this, it's going to cost an exorbitant amount of money. And then on top of that, is there, we have a lot of people that don't, they want Fair Oaks Ranch to be this little community, it's our little haven, right? So by connecting Bernie to Fair Oaks Ranch to San Antonio, that's going to be bringing a lot of additional other people through our city and through our community. And a lot of the feedback I get is we want to be left alone. So I just, before I could even move forward with something, would want data.
Sure, everybody's had a chance before I go again. I agree with the data part. I mean, I foresee this as a committee that, and maybe we do a survey of some sort to get a pulse. And I also don't feel like we have to, if this is the type of thing, and y'all can stop me if I shouldn't get down in the weeds on this, that has to be done all at once. Like, we could just do parts of the city, connect parts, just to make it safer for people who bike within our own community. I don't know, I don't have a, quote, dog in the fight either way, whether or not we connect to Bernie, but I will tell you, as someone who used to cycle, if we did this, I would drive out here to come cycle. So, thoughts on that?
I feel like the right side is very quiet down there.
Yeah. Taking it all in. When we've talked about multimodal in the past, it's always just come to my mind DEETs, because that's seems to me what we've kind of focused on in the past was improving that. So, because people do use golf carts along DEETs a lot, especially during the school year. I wouldn't necessarily have an issue with that if that's one of the DARP projects that we're going to do anyways, and has to be, we're going to have to put money into that road regardless. And so if we're going to put money into that road and it's going to be a big undertaking anyways, I wouldn't personally have a problem with doing that, so long as it doesn't increase it by a crazy amount, to make it safer for the folks that use it with golf carts and bikes. But aside from that, like connecting to Bernie and San Antonio and all that stuff, I don't know that I'm necessarily in favor of us focusing on that.
Well, I think we need details in a plan. What is it we're actually
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah, a lot of good points, and Chesley, thanks, and brings up in Emily, which y'all, and in Michelle too. I was trying to think through this, how we address it, how do we enter this, and because in some cases, you know, putting a committee together to design it or come up with ideas, you may need to have that before you determine what we can and can't do. I think there's some value in it, in making the determinations on what it is that we want. And yes, great points. We don't want to bring a lot of traffic into the city to invite it.
Do we want to start with a pulse of
So
the
hearing-
community?
we may want to take a step back and gather feedback and data through a survey, town halls,
Yes.
probably all of the above, to determine what the desires and
Yeah.
All the
and-
cyclists will
and-
show up.
and feedback and inputs actually are.
See, and I think going along with what you're saying, I'm all for putting together a committee, but I feel like when we put that committee together, that's telling the community, all right, we'd like to move forward some way with multimodal, but do we know that? So that's why I like the idea of the details and the data before we gather a group
I agree
of
with that.
crazies.
Well, I think we've already, set a precedent of having multimodal, right? Because we got the golf carts, you know, we've allowed that into the city, so I think we are gonna have to address it. And Dietz, I know when we were doing this campaign, during school hours, those golf carts were streaming down Dietz Elkhorn. It was crazy. But I do think it's something we need to look at, because I bike throughout the community. I bike in the back 40, because I figure I'll only get run over 1 out of 10 times back there.
Yes,
So,
the same.
But I do think it's something, to your point, Chesley, we need to get some data and just get the temperature of the committee, of the city for the committee here. I think that would help us a lot to start there, do that.
Good.
Maybe we have quarterly town hall meetings coming up. In fact, I think on one of the council meetings for, I think, the next month.
Yes.
So we could utilize that. Is this what we want to
Yeah.
utilize our next town hall meeting as a topic for? We could do that. All right.
And I think there's varying degrees of multimodal.
Yeah,
So
there are.
I think we got to have some kind of idea instead of just this universal name.
Yeah, it's not just bikes, I think is what you're talking about. It is golf carts. And I believe it's even includes walking. as
I
part
would
of-
say consistency throughout the city as well, because right now it's pockets. You have people that bike Dietz, they want to come to the back 40, but it gets a little scary, so what does that mean for everyone? We've added the shoulders now on Post Oak, or we're attempting to, so I think it all comes together of how do we incorporate the entire city, at least in some way.
And I think it's a future design issue, how we look at our roads and what we're going to do. And we may need to look at our golf cart / UTV ordinance again, insofar as where the golf carts and the UTVs are supposed to ride, if we're going to have pedestrians, off to the side of the road with bikes and stuff. So it's a project, for sure. But I just wasn't quite sure where we were headed with this. This has been, I've noticed it as one of the KPIs for a while, but it just seems to be one of those things that just kind of sits there. And if we're going to have it there, we need to go ahead and put some resources to it. And I don't know, maybe we can incorporate a Facebook outreach, for input from the citizenry, and see where it goes as well.
Well, it would be good to also, to find out the breakdown of how many people are, walking, golf carts, bikes, the various modes. And who knows, scooters might be out there next. The electric scooters might be coming down those. I've seen a few of those. But, and then to Michelle's point, we phase it in over time based on the feedback we get. But as we're getting ready to look at roads and making those plans, I mean, some of this stuff's gonna require bond issues. We might as well throw that in there as a consideration. Whether we do it or not, we should consider it, you know.
The other thing that just popped into my head on this when y'all were speaking is, what are we going to require of future development? I mean, I know there's not a whole lot coming down, but is that something that should also be or can be addressed in neighborhoods and things coming in? Look, now, our citizens expect X. Before, at least, and Carol probably can speak to this, it seemed like we weren't even a sidewalk community back in the day. And now we're talking about multimodal, which again, it's not a for or against thing, but it's, okay, so what are we going to require of future developers and, the UDC and those kinds of things. So just a thought.
So,
More questions?
yeah, definitely more questions, but art of the possible, I suppose, but you develop some feedback mechanisms, both virtual and in person. It was mentioned we have a couple of maybe small-scale test pilots and pilot projects in the works as part of currently planned items. Yes, ma'am.
And this is a question for council, does it make sense to pull just this piece out as an agenda item at a future council meeting? Just to kind of talk and get our heads wrapped around it?
Yeah, I mean, we can do that for discussion. I think my thoughts would be, let's do the town hall meeting first. Let's capture information from the residents.
Okay.
And then, yeah, I think it would be prudent that we bring it forward with the information that we get from the town hall meeting, and then almost develop a way ahead of how we're going to address all this.
Yep. Cool beans.
Okay. It's a start.
All right?
A great discussion. Thank you.
You didn't realize there was gonna be that much discussion on
No.
that one item, did you? Yeah.
Well, I had an inkling. Again, there's some that I won't beat a dead horse, but from a historic perspective, someone mentioned that this has been on here for a while. Where are we going with it? So that's exactly the discussion we need to have, I think. So no, it's great. Where are we? 2.4. Align proactive placemaking strategies with the MDD. I left this one alone with that respect, but again, this is probably similar to the last discussion. Honestly, I'm not sure what we meant here entirely. Does this need to be updated? Does it need to remain, or do we retain this as a forward-looking item with respect to Civic Center, Gateway feature, as specific projects? I'm open to your feedback on that one. We've identified a couple of possibilities, specifically with relation to the MDD, but I'm not sure if there was more to this one or not. So I'm open on this one on how or what to do with this, and maybe it comes off and is reframed elsewhere.
Or wait, isn't that something that came up that's pretty urgent though, right? Because there was a timeline on it?
I mean, we are proceeding with, and you, at your next council meeting, you will have an agenda item to request an extension
Okay.
vis-a-vis the Civic. So that is very much a part of
Okay.
the plan. So it doesn't negate what's currently in progress. I'm just looking for your input, and we can just, it could be as simple as delineating those specific projects within this priority. The
Gotcha.
higher level open-ended question is there more to this one, or is there a different concept in mind than those specifically?
This is higher level though, right, as opposed to,
I
are you
think
looking
so,
at the
but
future priorities? I'm done. Sorry. I'm asking a question.
And we do have, not that it can't belong here too, but we do have the Civic Center later on as a project as well.
This kind of I would say this kind of confuses me in I guess, looking forward to the future, because that's what this strategic plan is doing for us. I think we know that the MDD will partner, there's rules and regulations, but we can request that the MDD will partner with us. So I guess I'm a little confused on why we need it there, because it just seems like if we want to go to the MDD for future funds for a gateway feature, whatever it is, then we just are gonna go to the MDD and do that. I don't know that it needs to be on the strategic plan, personally.
I should just stop or muting myself. I saw that we had the gateway structure on this section before, and we dropped it off. Was there a reason why?
I'm sorry, where, Matt?
On the there was 2.4.1 in the past on this older one. Do we mean to drop that off of there?
One moment.
Yeah, we dropped several things, but that was the one that stuck out since we're in the middle of talking about all that on that committee. It's on the handout y'all left on our desk,
Understood. And
page 5, 2.4.1.
There was only one item that carried forward on that.
But the thing about it is that one was never, it's not marked as canceled, so just curious as to why.
it's not, and
Same for that 2.4.2.
I thought I put that back in somewhere else. That's what I'm searching for right
Oh,
now.
okay, I get you. I
And
don't see it, but
If I didn't, that was a mistake.
cool. Yeah, I don't see it unless would you have put it in another section altogether? If you don't know the answer right now, just
I don't
Just
know the
follow
answer
up
because I'm
and-
pretty sure I even had it on my notes, so I'm sorry, I'm blank for an explanation right now because the intent certainly is not to cancel that project.
okay. So if you can just clarify later on if
Yeah,
you put it
I
somewhere
will-
else
I will absolutely do that.
or that you added it back. Thank you.
I apologize, I'm not sure what happened to that one.
No worries.
To Chesley's point, is thinking through this, so what we're describing is a priority that really requires coordination between council and the MDD. And so I look at that more, that's a means for accomplishment of projects. Is it a requirement that we need to state that we need to make this happen over the year? And I don't know the full answer to that. And so it's a question.
So you're saying a more generic type of statement there instead of,
Well, is it an action, a priority that we need as part of our strategic action plan that says we coordinate with the MDD? I mean, when we're doing a project, it is a means for acquiring funding, but there are other methods, I mean, through the counties, through the state, grant opportunities that we could get, and we're not listing those out. Those are other means. I just don't see that coordination with the MDD should be a priority for us.
Yeah, so you asked my question more gracefully, because I'm not saying it is or it isn't important, I just think we're gonna do it regardless, and so maybe the strategic action portion of this is coming, and I'm just throwing something out there, but like coming up with a system that when council authorizes a project, we look for alternate methods of funding. To me, that would be what we would put on a strategic action plan, not specifically tying us to the MDD, if that makes sense. I'm not saying we're not going to go to the MDD or go wherever, but it's like search for alternate funding versus,
Always look for free money.
yeah, essentially. That to me would be the
Yeah.
strategic option.
And I know there was, no, that's a great point, 'cause I know there was a suggestion previously that I did not incorporate, but as far as the funding opportunities, and, specifically speaking, I mean, we're a pretty, high-value committee, so the grant opportunities are often limited, but, except that sometimes as they relate to infrastructure, there are some there. So I think there was a proposal at some point back under Pillar 1 in the financial portion that was not included in this draft to investigate or pursue outside funding opportunities. That there could be an opportunity there.
And perhaps if we just swapped MDD with alternative funding sources or something similar along that might make more sense from a pillar standpoint, from a KPI standpoint.
Yeah, this is more of a specific action item, not a necessarily strategic direction there. So I think, I like that idea, Chesley, of the alternate funding forces.
So I think, and obviously you're going to see the updated version of this. If it works for folks, we could remove this one as a priority, retain the current projects mentioned that we're working on now in conjunction, probably under infrastructure as a guide. Which now that I see my notes, that was a question. Do we keep this one and put those in, or do we put them elsewhere? But we can certainly do that. Add the alternative funding sources item. It could go here, probably under Pillar 1. It could go either way, probably, but that we can make that change for sure, if that makes sense.
I think that's a great priority for us. That we're always looking for alternate funding sources. I
Absolutely.
mean, and we have found them in certain cases, so.
Got vet money, right?
Mm-hmm. Great.
Right.
No, that gives me a lot of clarity. Thank you. Yeah, and that was the question I had, and you answered it well, so wonderful. 2.5, develop and implement environmental sustainability programs. So maybe this one needs an update. We're bringing to council in the next 4 to 6 weeks updated tree ordinances with respect to tree preservation. You'll see the tree maintenance item back on your agenda. I can't remember if it's the next one or the one after, but in July, that one will be before you. And we recently updated our drought contingency ordinance, which has gone into effect. So the broad question here are there other opportunities to enhance or refresh this priority 2.5? Just a question.
Chesley mentioned water, and that's kind of linked to our drought contingency and conservation, but water conservation. But honestly, I mean, in taking that and linking it with our water districts and overall focus, how do we put conservation methods for water implemented throughout the city? I think it will become a concern for us in the future. And so when is it that we need to start that process?
Some more opportunity or investigation for enhancements in our water conservation. I think it makes a lot of sense. You've heard Kelsey present on many occasions. She does a great job. I suspect she'd be chomping at the bit to find more great ideas for us. So I think that's a good revision.
Would this be, and I don't know the answer to this either, so I'm going to spark it with a question. Would this be the place that we would add things like partnering with the base and the Centennial Landscaping and all of that kind of stuff? Is there anything we want to do with that? And is that where it would go? Just a question.
Was it landscaping as it relates to, I didn't hear the first part.
Oh, the base and just, I guess,
Yeah, we had the
community partners. How about that? I mean, when it comes to conservation and how we can help, I mean, it's just a question. I don't know the answer to it, though.
As you mentioned, landscape. It was the Centennial Landscape Program through JBSA, and so they offered opportunities for communities to link with the bases. And good point, I think it was primarily focused on conservation and environmental impacts.
Okay.
We also have like wildlife conservation. I mean, I'm thinking about this just because I have a lady that comes and sits at my house and it's the wabblers, the bird or something, and wobblers. And so I guess my property specifically is where a lot of them nest. In, I guess I'm going to call it the reserve. It's got another name, but you know, how can we partner again with other community people to help conserve wildlife as well?
I like it. One of the unique characteristics of our community is the wildlife that we have here, so.
Where do we cover, managing the deer population? Because I know that ebbs and flows. Do we have that as part of our environmental issues?
Well, it was handled through the Wildlife Education Committee. I was just thinking through I know that they were the ones that did the population count of the deer.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then deer and rut and fawn season, when the signs go out.
Right. So, yeah, we do not have that identified
Right.
currently as a forward-looking item, so, but it certainly could be.
That committee is ongoing, right? Are they still active at all? I think I might be on it. I don't think I've ever been to a meeting, so that answers my question. Never mind.
I'm actually on it with you.
I think I'm in there too.
Yeah.
The committee hasn't met since we went through COVID, so they kind of fell off the radar. It's probably something that we ought to look at bringing back, because my belief is that the wildlife that we have as part of our community is one of the unique characteristics that we have as part of Fair Oaks Ranch. And so preserving that is probably important, that we're doing the right things. It should be a consideration as part of managing our future growth, is also the consideration of what it has as part of our wildlife. And I don't know, just the Wildlife Education Committee, I believe that was their focus, was to ensure that as part of the future growth of our city. So
I think the concern was explosion of the deer population.
Right.
and how to control that. But I also think it would be a great topic for one of our town halls to talk about people's feelings about the wildlife. And I know that the freeze that we had kind of helped control what we've got issues right now. So it's may not be, I'm not hearing as much about deer population now as we used to. But yeah, as our land gets developed, the wildlife's going to be pushed. So it's something we do need to keep an eye on.
Managing the wild hogs.
Wild hogs.
We had a budget item on that a while, but we haven't had that in a while, the hogs item, yeah.
Sorry. The Wildlife Education Committee is only on educating. Managing deer and managing hogs was a city council function. So I just wanted to clarify that. At one time, they did try to take that task on, but they couldn't. They didn't have the funds, they didn't have the personnel to help with that. So, but the Wildlife Education is the one that put out brochures about how to leave the deer alone, or the mama deer. They educated. We created brochures, pamphlets, had a quarterly newsletter. We had a photo contest of the wildlife, and we have some of those pictures hanging at City Hall. So I just wanted to clarify that. So if you wanted to expand that role, they do have a charter. We can bring that as part of this new project.
So back to the population. Do we have a way of tracking it at this point, the population we have in the city?
we did come up with a means of how we do a deer count.
Okay.
And I think we used a contractor to do it, I don't know, many years ago, Texas Parks and Wildlife, correct? And then the last two times we've done it, we've come up with a means of really using volunteers from within the neighborhood. And they came up with a specific method of how we do it, you know, time of day and how you count the deer, et cetera. And I believe we've used that the last two times. And it's probably at a point that we need to relook it. And if you use the same method, then you ought to be able to come up with something that is a similar count.
I think that'd be good to kind of know where we're at compared to the past, and so we can manage it. You know, it's more important.
So Carol brought up good points. That Wildlife Education Committee really focuses on education. Do we want to expand their responsibilities? Well, one, re-energize the committee, look at their responsibilities, and then incorporate, it'll really be a council action for consideration on expand their responsibilities. And I guess if Bruce is still going to stay as the lead, was it Bruce? Bruce. Yeah, stayed as the lead for the committee. I did talk to him about 2 weeks ago, and I think he's still interested, so. And then really, so if we're looking at all this, and then all the questions we talked about, wildlife and deer count, et cetera, if that all built, is this an action that would fall under environmental and conservation? Or is there another place in the strategic action plan? I think we've
I think it
identified
makes
that.
sense. I mean, yeah, we touched on trees, the, you know, water conservation, wildlife. I think those are three really solid priorities or projects to reinvigorate this 2.5. I think that's great direction.
Yeah, I would, under 2.5, if we could, in my recommendation, so it's open to, but we add a line item that talks about reinstituting or revitalizing the Wildlife Education Committee and maybe relooking their responsibilities. And then from that, it would tie in all the other deer count, preserving our wildlife, education, town hall meetings, et cetera, that they could be a part of. That,
I think that's great.
all right?
Absolutely. Appreciate that very much. No, that's why you're here, so thank you. So a lot of discussion on this very important pillar, of course, which is, again, exactly what we want. Wrapping up, I guess, just if there are any final comments on, based on what we've said, the proposed changes we're talking about, do these priorities properly describe or fully describe what we mean by responsible growth management? Are the pillars or the priorities we mentioned, are they, I'll bring back that, the SMART acronym again, are they specific enough, time sensitive, anything we're missing? Final comments. If not, and we'll get, like I said, we'll get many bites at this apple, so I think good discussion on this pillar, and this helps me a lot, so thank you. Go to pillar 3, reliable and sustainable infrastructure. This one could be really simple or really complex. We'll see how it goes. But I won't read them all off to you. But you know, 3.1, 3.4 all deal with our different types of infrastructure. So water, wastewater, roadways, drainage. Last year we separated the capital improvements plan, specifically the projects, from the strategic action plan, so we could analyze, you know, the budgets as a holistic package and the strategies for long-term development and enhancement separately. So most of the updates here, as we talked about under the previous pillar, revolve around updating the timing for first the master plans that we talked about and the CIP funding cycles, et cetera. So we're looking, as we talked about, towards that cycle, so that while we're implementing and constructing the plan projects, we're developing that next cycle. So most of these updates that are in the draft are timing, or either changing the timing or recycling the timing, if that's a word, to get us ready for the next cycle. So that's why we moved a couple of the CIP funding projects specifically from Pillar 2 to Pillar 3, just so they're aligned, but it's the same concept. 3.5, under city facilities, we revised the Civic Center timing based on the new contract that we just started here last week with the council approval. So beyond that, you know, what we have proposed is really a refresh of what's been ongoing. I think we've made, you know, much progress in this regard already. Again, I know council has said appropriately many times that we spent a number of years developing all these plans, and now we're putting them into action. So at this point, it's really to continue that action and to update for future as well. So with that all said, I think it's an open discussion on the whole pillar. What are we missing? What can be added, clarified? I don't have any other specific questions in the individual priorities, but does enhance and ensure the continuity of blah, blah, blah adequately cover reliable and sustainable infrastructure? Open question.
I have one that may be dumb, but 3.53, develop a citywide space plan. What does that mean? Because it's already in progress, so I'm not quite so sure what that refers to.
This is, yeah, it's in progress in that we're revamping it. So it's related to, it's really a combination of the City Hall project and the Civic Center project, except as it really is, in our case, as it relates to staffing. So as we're considering potentially new positions, city planner, project manager, some of those, where are we going to put them? Both from just a actual adequate space perspective, but functionally as well. So
Okay.
maybe that one really could be yellow because we're just starting to really reinvigorate post-City Hall remodel, but that's the idea.
Okay.
Are there further expansion needs for the city operations?
I'm sorry?
Are there further expansion needs for the city operations?
None planned other than what we just talked about.
Okay.
And that's part of why we're here as well. But thinking about that, if there is a need for new functions, new programs, then we will need space.
I put my Roy hat back on. Do we have,
We
I'm
need a
trying to look
cardboard
at this.
cutout or something.
Huh?
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do we have a way of continually monitoring if we can sustain utilities for the future, if that makes sense? I mean, can our currently evaluating or continuing to evaluate what we get from GBRA, I'm just throw water out there, and what happens if our wells go dry? I mean, those kinds of things, so continually reevaluating the future, like how we can sustain our future utilities. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I know was it last year when we upped our capacity with GBRA? So that was one specific action we took. I'd probably defer to Grant or Steve on.
I'm just saying,
on
do we
what we
want
do, or if we do that ongoing, but
that? I
it's a
guess
fair
that's
question.
my question. Do we want that on, that we will continue? I mean, because obviously if and I'm not saying they are, so people don't panic, but if our water went down, let's just say our wells went dry or whatever, how can we sustain our utilities? I mean, I don't think we can get more water from GBRA, so are we continually planning for the future? It's a Roy question. Julio?
I'll phone a friend.
I think, just to partly answer that question, every year we do an assessment of how much water we want to buy from GBRA for the following year. We have to enter and submit our annual commitment, and we're stuck with that commitment for the year. And you can never you can always ratchet that up, but you can never ratchet down. So, in addition to that, no, we're also looking at trying to bring on additional wells. We have some inactive wells. One is probably one of the more productive ones down at JW1 down on the south side of the city. But if there's other opportunities to bring on other wells, we're also trying to explore that too.
So I think my question is, thank you for doing that, and I appreciate that we are. Does that need to be on our strategic plan so that we know moving forward we want to do that? I think that's my question.
Right, I think we should make it a priority.
I agree, it needs to be on there, yeah. And Grant brought up a couple of specific examples that we are doing or at least exploring, but to your point, we don't actually have that listed on here right now, so I think that's fair.
Yeah, I was just thinking through it, whether it's a priority. It is. I mean, yeah, when I talk about it, I mean, it always is a priority, so it's a concern.
And the priority literally says ensure continuity, right? So I think
Covers it.
that's fair to be a bit, but It may, I mean, maybe the verbiage does, but to those specific outputs or projects, if you will, that were just mentioned, I think they can be further delineated on here. No, that's great. I mean, the whole point is to make sure that we're tracking these things. So to have that as a specific item or items to enhance under that priority.
I mean, and the things that I think about when Grant says, we can go yearly and go get more water, but we can't get less. But at some point, GBRA is not going to have more water. So how are we looking to the future to plan for that? And I think that's a strategic.
So maybe, and you could add to the 3.1, you can just add enhance and ensure the continuity and availability of reliable water resources,
But I
because
know
then
what it
that would
means, and I just can't remember it.
encourage the seeking of other available resources.
I just want to make sure we're
Yeah.
keeping that in our thoughts.
No, and Carol was good to point out just now, project 3.1.15 under 3.1. It's yellow right now without a continuation near the top of the page. That could be a good place for it too, just to.
Maybe we can reword it a bit.
We absolutely could.
Hey, Scott, what does CCN stand for? CCN obligations?
I blank it. It's it's the area that we serve water. Help me out with the acronym. Certificate of Convenience and Necessity.
Okay.
So, but basically, the area in which we serve is the layperson perspective for. But thank you. I always blank that one too.
Basically, it designates the responsibility of the municipality to provide a water resource or a wastewater resource to that area.
But we should probably just say that, to your point.
Yeah, acronyms kind of can drive you crazy. It's just-
We love our acronyms, I know. But no, thank you.
Yeah, I like the discussion that we were having, talking about future need of water. And I agree with having it as a project for consideration as we move forward. And there's multiple areas in this. Grant brought up, future requirements. If we looked at additional wells, I think we've even talked about including as part of maybe even development agreements as we go forward, requirements to drill wells if we knew where the wells were going to go if they were high producers. But also it's tracking our water resource and looking for other means of how we provide that water resource to our community, because I believe everybody's under the understanding that sometime in the future, we're going to have a challenge with water as a resource to our community. And so the more that we prepare for that, and with that, I think a concern for us is the North 40, where we have a lot of individuals that are on individual wells. And if that water resource becomes a challenge for the city, at some point it's going to become a challenge for individual landowners. So I think it's a consideration of how do we prepare for that, because at some point it may become a city responsibility.
And with you saying that, it just kind of tweaks my brain back to when we had the Post Oak Trail project, and we had that meeting, and the guy came in and said, if I lose my well, on Rolling Acres, there's a water line, so I would have to pay the cost, but I could attach to city water. But there are multiple points in the north back 40 that don't have lines there that can't attach. So they literally will have zero water resource. I think that falls under it. How do we prepare? We all pay taxes, so how do we prepare the city for this?
No, that's good.
I was right. No, good.
It's looking to the future to make sure that,
We have some, yeah, we have a challenge, like existing developments, like you're saying, and some potential new ones too, is like sometimes connecting to that access point can be a challenge. And in some cases, we don't know, so I agree. Other items under infrastructure. Big topic for sure, but again, we're beginning to execute those projects now and trying to be forward-looking at the same time. That's the crux of this one. Should we move on to public safety, et cetera?
Already marked it out.
We can.
Watch.
We can start right there. If everyone's good, to continue. Pillar 4 is public health, safety, and something. It was welfare previously. It was public health, safety, and welfare. Again, the proposal was justice, as I mentioned, to incorporate the municipal court functions, which is proposed as a new priority 4.6. And that's a combination of adding a couple projects and moving the remaining projects from Pillar 5 to Pillar 4 for municipal court to incorporate into that public safety umbrella.
We put like judicial something. I don't know what that something would be, but just take out justice.
You
I
can
mean,
use the word court.
yeah.
I mean, that's right.
You could.
And you walked in right at the perfect time.
I was going through it, trying to think, and I know we're trying to specify as part of the pillar that we include our court system, I believe is really what we're trying to get to.
Yes.
And so, is it a requirement? So we talk about public health and safety. Is that comprehensive enough that it covers everything that we need? Because we do have a priority that's listed that specifically covers our municipal court. Does it need to be stated as part of the pillar? Really a
Yeah.
question
I like
that I'll
public
open.
health and safety.
Yeah,
I really just, because, I mean, safety includes the court, health includes the court, so, I mean, if it's got its own priority, I just like public health and safety, personally.
Same, agree.
That's kind of
Good.
what I was leading to. I think it's comprehensive enough that it includes all of it,
Yeah.
so.
I definitely try to err towards the less is more, so I'm good with that. We can make that change. So we'll try to run through this quickly. So 4.1 to enhance and ensure continuity of police services through, so last year we concluded the police utilization study, and through other enhancements and investments in the police department over the years, I think we've largely accomplished at least what was set out originally in 4.1. So I think the crux of the question here is, what do we mean, or where do we want to go by ensuring continuity in the future, or should it be more future-looking? Does this mean personnel, equipment? Are there any concerns or operational needs from a community perspective that need to be enhanced with respect to police services? I think we've seen the presentations and the accolades many times. We do a great job. Our department is certainly very community-oriented, which is technically a different priority, I think. But based on the study, appropriately staffed. So, with regard to our police services specifically, are there any initiatives or fundamentals that we believe are untouched or could be enhanced?
I just don't remember, why did the K-9 unit get canceled?
I don't recall
I don't know the answer.
specifically. I think this was,
I may not have been here, but I was just,
Didn't the new officer
There will be, I mean, there will be at some point a new K-9 unit. This one talked about
I thought
a
the new
or an
officer
additional
coming
K-9 unit.
on is a handler. I believe he's a K-9 handler. Yeah, I would assume that would be the case, but, so we're turning it red and taking that away, that possibility away now? Is my question. Same concern.
Yeah, I mean, the short, not that it can't be brought back. The short answer was the having additional or 2 K-9 units wasn't on the short list for considerations, at least for the past few years, but certainly an open question.
Chief,
Want to talk about K-9?
please.
Yeah, so the original plan under the SCP was to add the second K-9. We keep pushing it down the line. Buddy is still pretty vigorous. So I think we got a couple more years at him, so we can kind of push that down before we add that second one, or look to replace him when he needs to retire. So
Wasn't a funding issue. Wasn't a funding issue.
the second K-9 wasn't a priority from a department standpoint. No.
Scott, maybe for Chief, is there anything that we should list as part of our priorities related to the school resource officer program? Seem to have a lot of focus with it. And
Good question, and I was going to bring that up in about 2 topics, so we can do another. So
Okay.
4.4 was community outreach initiatives. I think there were some in the past, but the remaining one that we, of course, we did implement last year was the school resource officer program. That obviously is in place. It's been very well received, very, very well managed so far as I know. So reiterating your question, I guess, but
is it a project or
Whether-
a focus for us? Anything specific we need to do? Is it's just an action that's occurring that we support? Is there any
So we list-
additional
I'm sorry.
requirements?
From a funding perspective, I would probably say no, not right now. Some of the community programs that we're currently developing are going to have very, very low costs, just maybe some staff time. Outside of that, I don't see any funding need for outreach initiatives unless it comes to maybe just supplies, pamphlets, things like that, that we can fund through our general fund.
Thanks, Chief.
Hey, Scott, I have a question on 4.1.10, the developing the formal recognition program. Is it just for the police department and nobody else? Because it's not over here on the operational excellence. So I don't know, is that something that should just be throughout the whole?
Well, actually, I can't answer that one.
Okay.
We do have a retention initiative under Pillar 5, which is we added it just to your question, actually, to 5.1.7 to make it citywide initiatives. I can't speak intelligently specifically to the public safety one, this 4.1.10, if there was something more specific behind it. But we do want to make sure we were focusing on retention initiatives from a citywide perspective.
Isn't that what we just kind of went through and Chief talked about in our budget and restructuring so that there's a chance for people to move up and all of that? I think that's probably what this is, maybe?
Yeah, to get some clarity on that one was more of a planning and developing of an annual awards kind of banquet to announce Officer of the Year awards, certain awards have a designated day or time that awards are given out versus just randomly when they happen. 2 of the officers right now, one of them being the SROs, are working on that and funding that through donations. So it's kind of one of those things where we're still in the planning phase of that one, and they're working that donation angle to be able to conduct that, have the dinner, and be able to invite families, things like that. So that's kind of where that was headed for that one.
I actually support it. I just think it wasn't clear, like 5.1.7 kind of it's baked into the retention. You don't know what that means when you, it's more specific over here under the 4.1.10. So just maybe to clarify that across the
Okay.
board. If that's something we're doing all over versus just in the safety.
And I think I wanted to point out 4.1.9 as well, which is organizational structure to ensure continuity of leadership. I think someone asked that question with respect to the budget item we're considering right now. So that's the one we did, and we purposefully made the timing for that one potentially 2024, since that's the budget we're considering right now. I'll quickly go through the other ones, and then if we want to loop back, we certainly can, because I think most, except for maybe courts, are short. So 4.2 and 4.3 are both, deal with our fire and EMS services. Obviously, we just approved the study for that at our last meeting. So the timing will take, as you saw, I think it's 200 days for the study itself, plus potentially longer to obviously implement any potential emphasis recommendations from that study. So I essentially just stretched those two out. I did want to loop back to community outreach initiatives as well, insofar as what does that mean to you beyond the school resource officer program we have now. The police department do a lot of outreach as far as door knocking for specific events and situations, attend various HOA and neighborhood meetings. Is there a need, or are there ideas for further enhancement in that regard? I'll stop there, because I think I saw a hand somewhere.
I have a question back up on 4.2 and 4.3 real
Mhm.
quick. I see 4.2.3, update and renew service agreements with emergency services providers, but that's under fire. So are we doing the same for EMS, which I think is 4.3, and can we add that there?
Yeah, we should, yes.
Because I think we want to do both and look into alternate possible EMS and fire services.
And I don't remember the term for our EMS provider, but yes, I'll
Yes.
just have to look at what that,
Okay.
I do know that our current fire agreement comes up next year, so for our fiscal year 25 budget. That was a bit, but yeah, we'll
I'd
look
just
and
like
revise
to
that
see
one
it
as
added
well.
for EMS as well,
Sure.
so that we could do both.
Nope, that makes sense. I also want to talk about, and we can loop back to all of these as council has more questions or concerns or questions, but priority 4.5, which was to establish a formal emergency response plan. This is one that came up at the city council here several meetings ago. The mayor appointed a committee to work specifically on the SOPs for emergency response, which is a big part of it. I know that internally, one of the first things Chief and I talked about when I got here, just as a broad package internally, is to update, or in some cases initiate our internally, staff-wise, our emergency management training. So through FEMA, the NIMS, the National Incident Management System, and what was it, ICS, Incident Command System. So do that internally. We need to develop a formalized continuity of operations plan, which is not dissimilar from the SOP, but it's more inwardly focused and touches all the services in our organization, not just the public safety. So this one, I just want to point out, because from a management perspective, that's a big focus of mine over the next couple of years in the public safety realm, because in many cases, we either don't have it or it needs significant updates.
So on that note, for the emergency response and getting all this, I don't know if we need to add it as a priority under that, but can we also have like an education time where council can then be educated on what our plan is, or is that not possible?
Oh, that's
Possible.
definitely possible.
I mean, because, when an emergency is happening, I couldn't tell you what it is that if I have a role, if I'm supposed to give out information that's given to us. So I think it's important if we're in the middle of that and we have constituents calling us, knowing what my role as a council member is. Or do I just send them straight to chief or the city manager or just the website? So having some sort of an educational tool to that, I think is important.
No, it's a great suggestion, and it's come up internally a couple times, both not from a council perspective, but from a staff perspective. But when we are in a formal declared emergency situation, the short answer is the chief is our emergency management, our emergency officer, and that's where it goes. But to formalize and detail the hierarchy and the relationships there, I think is important. So, thank you.
I think there's two proponents to that. One, it should be incorporated as part of our SOP of education as part of the council on specific incidents. But also I think there's a broader aspect in how we educate the council on the overall emergency response plan. So that even when we're not in an emergency, that council fully understands our city's responsibilities, what we're going to take on, and council's interaction as part of those when they do occur.
No, absolutely. And I think that will have to be rolled in as, it makes sense to me to roll in as part of as we're developing these three items here, because we definitely need to do that internally as well, but council does have a role and that should be defined, and understand. It's a absolutely vital question.
And these are good topics that we have under there, and honestly, we did approve the committee to start reviewing that, and it's on me to get this moving. I've made some notes, and it's really just the chief and the other committee members, and just setting dates on when we can start organizing this. I mean, and it's a good objective for us next year to get this formalized. So yes.
And I think they can and will run parallel, Mayor. So it's not just on you. I mean, a lot of these things are related to the entire staff, which is on me and the executive team to get that ball rolling as well. But the intent is to put absolutely. To put this on the list, put them in tandem, so that we are, not that we haven't done a great job already, but so that we're better prepared when these emergent issues arise.
Okay.
4.6 we've talked about quite a bit already. That's again incorporating the municipal court processes into public safety. So in large part, we migrated a couple, I think, of the relevant operational items from, from Pillar 5 into Pillar 4, which was streamlining the case flow processes. And the last one, the online services one, you'll notice I stretched that out quite a ways because I intended that would come at least part and parcel of our ERP process as well back on Pillar 1. So I think as we're reviewing that, we'll have to review what our future needs are with respect to court case management within that as well. So those were the two revised ones from Pillar 5. I also wanted to, just so we could track it, put on a couple of our higher profile projects right now with the court, which is court security, specifically with this building. And I expect to have a proposal back within the month, possibly next week. I don't want to promise that, but that is, the council did appropriate in full the fund balance for the court security fund last year. It's $57,000-ish, so we're actively seeking proposals on that right now. And then the questions have come up about possibly converting to, or not converting, but enhancing to a court of record within our court security. There's a lot to that, both from a operational and a financial perspective, but the crux of a court of record, and Ricardo might come up and slap me, but the short version of that is it allows the city to have its judicial findings and when there is a trial, there's a bench trial or jury trial, as a final decision pending appeal. Right now, when you're not a court of a record, a defendant has the opportunity to essentially appeal the case, and they retry the case in full at the next level, district court, typically county court. It doesn't happen a lot, but it has happened. So by becoming a court of record, you fully record and transcribe the proceedings just like you would be familiar with in a district court or what you see on TV essentially, and that becomes the first. So if it's appealed, then it becomes at the next level an appeal of the verdict at this level rather than a whole new trial. So there's a process to doing that. There are some counsel and code changes that need to be made, but I know that's been at least asked about even before I arrived here. But we wanted to point that out as a project as well.
I've talked to Kim about that one before, or specifically. Is the judge on board with all these other, well, I guess really, has she reviewed this? And
Did we solicit her feedback and/or recommendations for this section of the strategic plan?
thank you, Chesley.
With respect to this piece of paper, no. And the reason is because the latter two were existing components of the, not that I'm opposed to it, by the way, but the latter two were existing components that were, at least 4.6.3 were already in the process of now. The first two, while I did not specifically tell her that these were on our draft plan, I know that these are two very high priorities for the judge.
Can I just ask, what is it that we're doing to streamline the case flow processes and enhance the online services?
Sure. Well, case flow processes we've already been converting over the last year and a half at least to electronic files, both for retention and for judicial review. So the judge has the ability to review case files and render the final decisions and close the cases remotely, just to enhance that flow so we don't have as much paper flowing back and forth, both from a case flow as well as a retention standpoint. Online services were not as far, which is why it's stretched out, but there are some possibilities, both in terms from a customer-facing perspective and in terms of payment and asking for deferred sentences, things like that, electronically and remotely, that we haven't fully implemented yet. And then how that looks, as we mentioned, potentially with a new ERP system, a new case management system, we don't know at this point. But again, that will be part of if we embark down the new ERP system route. That was the intent there.
And I would encourage us to talk with Ricardo and the judge on, make sure we're consulting with both of them when we do go down that route as to what their input is on the systems that we're looking at using, just because they're the ones doing it every day.
Yeah, and I was telling Councilmember Roden during the break that I've been in the past, I've been a part of 2 ERP conversions already in other places. It's not fun, but it has to be done. And typically what we do is we have stakeholders from the entire organization, just for what you mentioned. So it's not just finance. To that point, it's in our case, it's the utility folks, it's the court folks, it's, what am I missing? Whoever else has a module in there. But it's pretty much everybody, at least as a representation perspective.
Perfect. Thank you.
Questions, comments on public safety? And as you think through, and again, we'll come back to this several times and we'll propose some too, but this is one of the more nebulous ones when you talk particularly about KPIs. How do you track public safety? We track, and you've seen the chief's annual reports, we track arrest records and crime data and demographic data. We do the same thing in court with regard to caseloads and that type of thing. But at the same time, a lot of public safety measures are largely externally influenced. right? So crime rate is certainly a measure of public safety, but there's a lot more to it because there's a lot that's out of our hands, at least from a prevention standpoint. We're really good at grabbing them, but sometimes you can have a bump in crime rate, for example, that doesn't necessarily do with
Well,
how we're doing things. It's just a natural order of activity. So beyond that, what are some, if you're thinking about how are we successful in public safety, how do we track that?
and we only control one aspect.
Right,
Okay, we only control the police department.
exactly.
Fire services and EMS are contracted, so, but I guess we'll get some more data
And
here
response
shortly.
times, that's another one, for
Correct.
sure, that we do have.
Yes.
So we have those, and again, you don't have to answer now, but that would just be open questions to go through this. This is, we can track the inputs and sometimes the outputs really well. The outcomes are a little bit harder just because, like as I mentioned, there were so many external factors that influence this pillar. But Mayor, anything else on public safety?
I think we did a pretty thorough job.
We're almost there. And lack of planning on my part, I did not order lunch. I wasn't sure how long we'd take, so if that influences your timeline, you keep that in mind. But, the last pillar is operational excellence, which is, effectively our administrative functions, and we've tooled this down quite a bit because I think a lot of the operation inherently administration impacts and serves the other areas, right? So a lot of those functions are embedded in the other pillars already, particularly the financial section, but we talk about retention and several functions as a portion of HR, so a lot of it's already there. But we did want to, highlight some of the specific ones that, for the most part, are still outstanding. I don't think I proposed any new projects or changes in the area. There are some that are revised. I guess I can flip the slide just for the record. Priority 5.1, evaluate, implement key HR programs that promote organizational design and development. We updated the comp plan portion just specifically just to integrate public safety because that was a comment last year. It was along the line. It's similar to the retention one, but what are we doing to look at public safety specifically? And that was largely in terms of the compensation plan. So we do have two different compensation plan grids, one for civilian job classifications, and then there's a whole separate pay grade that's specific to the police department. So we do that, and we update that regularly through the city's policy on compensation changes. When we do a compensation study, probably within the next few years, we'll be going through the same processes. But that was just to point out that, or to call out specifically public safety as a separate and distinct process towards compensation. Sure.
My brain is going, sorry. In 5.1 for HR programs and organizational development, have we had, or maybe is it part of the compensation benefit plan, an overall look of the jobs that we have within our city, what we currently have staffed, and what cities around us do? I mean, for example, having a project manager, do we have a way of comparing that and coming up with almost like what we're missing, if that makes sense? Or maybe, if we have something that's unused, it could be turned into, they could be a project manager in a this. I don't know if that question makes sense, but a way of looking through our jobs and making sure it's appropriate for a city of our size, for a city given what we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And or should that be added?
Kind of is the short answer, and Joanna may want to add some color to this as well. But certainly when we did the most recent update to the compensation plan, we had our 13 or 14 benchmark cities that in which we had all of the, their data that we use to develop our comparables and everything. So from those cities, we either have had or can get that. We look at it when we're embarking on a potential new job classification. We definitely look to comparables there to see what's there. And I understand what you're asking more holistically is, have we reviewed
I think it's different
City of
in a
Bernie,
sense,
City of
like,
Chavano, and see everything they have, what do we not have?
yeah, that's
Um,
kind of more of what I'm thinking. Like, I mean, I know, again, the project manager, we've talked about possibly a planner. I mean, there's certain things that we don't have, but have we looked again at comparable cities, if you want to call them that, and they have a planner, they have a this, they have a that. Oh, we didn't think of that, so that we can kind of build a roadmap for the future of where we're going or what we might potentially need to budget for 7 years in advance because of
Yeah.
our growth, or I don't know if that makes sense. So like looking
does.
forward and and I'm not saying removing EFTs,
Sure.
but looking forward and saying we have 5 of this and maybe we need to reclassify that to this because we don't use it and we only have 4, but instead of adding a whole new EFT, we can reclassify it to this. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So planning for staffing.
Sure, yeah, and probably not holistically, and if Joanna says, oh, yes, we have, she can, but, for example, I said, when we do either the omnibus study, or if we have a new or revised position, we definitely look at it then. As a recent example, I'll spare you the details, but just this week, I came across a correspondence with the City of Bernie in which I believe they call it a construction project manager position was mentioned. So my first call next week is going to be to the City of Bernie to get more specifics about that position in conjunction with ours. So I think what you're suggesting is good. Have I looked at every type of job classification in our benchmark cities? I haven't personally, but we certainly could. I think it's a good idea. I think we've been
I think it gives us a roadmap.
fighting fires probably for
Yes.
the last number of years and haven't looked at that more. We've looked at more of a needs-based focus and probably future looking.
I mean, I feel like that's strategic planning, looking to
Sure.
the future and trying to decide what it is staffing-wise we're going to need. I mean, it came up in budget a couple years ago when we added the communications specialist, and we all have different ideas of what that is. Is it a PR person? I mean, we talked about all kinds of stuff. So looking at, I think, comparable cities, that's part of strategic planning, personally.
It's, yeah, a great suggestion. I don't think it's, at least on the surface level, extraordinarily difficult to do. Joanna's team has a lot of contacts already. We do those one-off surveys, like I mentioned, all the time. A lot of budget documents have personnel listed. Ours does. We have, how many utility techs we have, police officer, on and on. So you can get a lot of data right there. We haven't really compiled that, but we probably should. I like it. Priority 5.2, communication strategy. We just talked about the communication plan. I won't go into detail unless you have questions. We have at least a couple reps here. But for this one, just so you know, this is the only full rehab or replacement I did as in this draft plan, is to incorporate the strategic communications plan that has been presented to you in this plan as priority 5.2. So the projects 5.1 through 5.5 have been wholly replaced with what's in that strategic communications plan. And you've seen, in that plan, we have a lot of sub-projects at the department level under these that were presented to you about a month ago. But just understand that this reflects in full that plan. So I've really liked that process. As I told them at the time, I've used that as they've been the guinea pig to develop the process where we further develop this plan into our departmental strategic plans under it, so that ultimately all rolls up. So the idea is with all departments, we'll take this plan, fully bake the projects in here into sub-components or actions, so that we have a holistic rub. Communications happened to be the first one because that was deemed rightfully a very high priority of the council, so we developed that one. the intent is to do the same off of this framework. And that will, again, probably take a year or two to get to fully develop all of these in every department, every function. But that's exactly the framework we're trying to establish.
I like the I like the projects that you've listed under communication. I think it's pretty thorough, and it complements the discussions that we had when we talked about the communications plan that we've laid out. We have made, in my opinion, we've made significant accomplishments in our communications, especially to residents over the last over the last year's time frame. To the point that you made, I mean, we're starting to organize it now into what is effective. And so we're doing a lot. As we gather data and we gather information, then we can become more effective in how we do this. And I think that these projects lay that out in a methodology that we could get there. So I think we're on the right track.
Yeah. And hopefully if council's amenable and likes it, that's ultimately the type of, I don't know if it'd be quarterly or semi-annual or some type of feedback process for you all to see, how we're breaking out these individual pillars or priorities as well. So we could have essentially a operational excellence update once or twice a year, and the same with the other pillars. So you can see where we are on these projects, where we are on the KPIs, up or down, trend lines, et cetera. But I think, again, just because it was a council priority, we used communications as the guinea pig, and so far I think it's gone well. And it has been a priority as a result of your direction. 5.3, evaluate, update service delivery expectations and best practices. The only remaining item on the current version of this plan is it relates to records management, which is in the city secretary's domain. We're implementing the electronic records retention system, the database as we speak. You budgeted for that last year. That implementation's ongoing. We are, in fact, senior staff is going to talk next week about where we're going to go next with the digitization project, which is also in the budget. And that's to actually scan and organize the thousands and thousands upon documents we have paper right now into digital form to put into this system, this record management system that we're developing right now as a database. So that's ongoing. The rest of the prior projects you see from the old plan have been closed out in one form or another. That doesn't mean we're necessarily perfect with regard to service delivery. It just becomes an open question of where do we go next, both from an internal customer perspective, how we're serving our operations, as well as, of course, externally focused as well.
Well, I do remember that we put a lot of emphasis on service expectations, in the past 2 years, I think. And I think it really shows how well it's come back up on what the systems are that you guys are implementing. So good work.
I think, and one that I didn't put on here only because I think it's going to fall under 5.5 is during our communications plan update. Actually, I think it might have been the first update we did, or the draft plan we gave to you. Some discussions of some type of customer or resident tracking system came in, like the types of calls we're getting, how we're responding to them. We talked about potential, customer resource management systems or light versions of that. I think that will be on the list. I didn't put that on the list only because I think that will fall under 5.5, which is the IT, evaluate and update IT infrastructure, software and security. And I gleaned this down just to one project, which was to develop an IT master plan. And I think that I feel, having worked with the team over almost a couple years now, we've come to you with many proposals over the last couple years to update software, update servers, the water meter upgrades, et cetera, et cetera. So we've been playing, I think, largely catch up for the last number of years, replacing our older technologies and hardware with respect to our infrastructure for many years. And with deference to the staff, that's just the systems we inherited, right? We've been doing that. We haven't spending the planning time and probably resources needed to plan for the future so that we're not just piecemealing what we already have, and potentially adding on to our large, metaphorical gumball without having pieces coalesce, talk to each other, eliminating redundancies where we can. So I really think we need to take a step back, develop a master plan so that we can programmatically plan for and budget for IT items going forward. I think that will take some resources just from a planning perspective, just to get that, because we're talking about a citywide system or systems that we need to analyze. So that likely will be a budget item for you to consider as well in the upcoming process. But that's why I wanted to simplify that into one omnibus project. I think there was a question.
Do we have, and this is a question I know we have generators that run our servers and the things so that when we had an emergency and it went down, we lost power, all that kind of stuff. Are those on a replacement cost program, or do we just evaluate those and then when they don't function properly or whatever? Because it seems like to me, moving forward, that's kind of one of the things that we want to make sure we're maintaining and replacing, I think from a security standpoint, so I think it falls under that, but also just from a safety. So it goes under multiple little layers in this, but it just, food for thought, I think we need to consider that.
Yeah, we certainly have a maintenance cycle for all of them. We do.
What about
square, but
replacement?
Replacement.
Okay,
is-
thank you.
We do. I can't speak for. I don't remember what the life cycle is if you do, but
That would be part of your plan. I mean, that'd be part of your IT plan, right? Yeah.
it certainly affects IT.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, is it IT or is that infrastructure? Probably
Probably
both.
both.
But we should probably dust that one off too. Good suggestion.
I like the idea of an IT master plan, and to the point that staff has brought to council many changes that we've made, all positive changes that we're implementing. But for me, the understanding how it fits into an overall structure that supports our city operations, I'm not sure that I fully understand. So as we move to Microsoft Office or whatever, Office 365, and understand the benefits and why we specifically did it, and understand and support that decision, but taking a look at that in the overall structure of our city operations, that's one point. But you mentioned the city meters, and then as we look forward from that, what other areas do we need to focus on in the future that would relate to the improvements that we're making currently? So some of them, to me, they just come up, I wouldn't say last minute, but if we could focus that out maybe over the next 5 years to understand what are those areas that we need to implement. And my thoughts is that would be under an IT master plan. Is that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you had a couple of things that Brian and I have talked about too, that the first, other than fixing everything, some of the first items that Brian was tasked with when he arrived, and still a little bit ongoing, is even just developing an inventory of all, not just our softwares, but all of our equipment. We really didn't have that inherited from the provider we had previously. So step one is, what do we have, right? And when is it up for replacement or renewal or end of life? Where is it? Yeah, absolutely. They've made great strides with the inventory. We know, we at least know where all of our PCs are now, and they're all in a cycle. So step one is well in hand, but.
inventory job, does that include the police?
Yes, it does. So everything from not just the PCs, but cameras, both in-car and body cams as we go to that project, the iPads that they use for their field service. There's a lot more to it than that, but the data systems we use to collect and retain the video and other evidence, that's all inventoried in IT, yes. Well, we got close, 12:05. I'll just wrap up. Again, thank you very much for the discussion. I hope that the council is open to doing this a little more often than just once a year, whether it's special meetings or regular meeting updates or a combination of both. With the council blessing, I would like to take this feedback, incorporate into a formal plan for council review and approval, so we can standardize this process going forward and memorialize it, if you will, as a starting point for how we're going to, like I said, influence the budget, influence planning, everything we do. We'll need a lot of work internally, I think, not just to make these changes, but to operationalize what some of these items mean, the specific action items underneath the projects and priorities to get them started. But ultimately, starting with the budget season, hopefully at least quarterly, if not monthly, we can update on the small items, incorporate some KPIs. This will certainly be a long-term process, but this was a great start or restart, if you will. I hope it was beneficial to you all, and just understanding that this is the beginning, not the end. So when we meet again next time, or if you have offline comments, by all means, we hit something later like, God, I should have said this or should have added it. Send them to me, send them to staff, et cetera. We can certainly incorporate and bring it back to you. So I will stop there unless there's other questions for me.
Any other comments from the
Thank you for
council?
your time.
No? I just appreciate, I appreciate y'all making the time to be here for a special council meeting. And I appreciate the comments that were made as part of this. And I know from the city staff that's here, my belief is it's probably one of the more thorough reviews that we have done on the strategic action plan. And so if you look at this, and now if you go back through the matrix and look at this, we've really identified those priorities specifically for next year, what we want to focus on, and some of those go out for the 5-year plan. But what it provides what it really provides us is for city council, but also my belief is for the city staff, is where we're going to allocate our resources when we talk about, one big is budget, but also limited man hours and limited equipment that we have. And so these were the priorities. This is the area that we're going to focus on. And so there would be other things that will come up during the year, but this becomes the focus of where we want to concentrate our efforts. And so I just wanted to say, for a thorough review, what I believe was a pretty good thorough review. And then, Scott, to your point, as we take this forward, maybe it is, as we look at this, maybe there's 2 times in the year that we could bring this back and maybe evaluate where we are in the accomplishment of these. So, we pass a budget in October, and, maybe December, maybe 2 times is tough. Maybe there's a time in December, January that we reevaluate, and then it becomes, March, April, a time frame to re-look the strategic action plan for the next year. And then maybe it is as we close out the year, there's probably maybe an evaluation in there, but right before we do a budget. I don't know. I think there's an opportunity, though. The feedback is accomplishment is the key. Are we doing those things that we have set out as part of the strategic action plan? Are we getting them done? That really is a point. Anything else we need?
No, that's great. Thanks again.
Any, any comments from staff or anybody here tonight, today? It's not tonight. All right. Christine, anything else that we've missed or
Yes, sir.
that we need to do? Scott, anything else from your standpoint?
We got a lot here. We'll get to work.
All right. Christine, I have the time now is 12:10, and we are adjourned.